There has been a curious epidemic recently sweeping through the folk, driving many into a frenzied dance that lasted day and night without pause until they collapsed from exhaustion. Tragically, many have perished as a result. This peculiar account comes from an ancient manuscript tucked away in the city archives of Stroudsburg, located in the Alsace region of France, which was once part of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, I may not have the best dance moves myself, but thankfully I've never caused anyone harm yet. What transpired in Strasbourg that led people to dance to their demise? Join me as we journey back in time to unravel the enigma of the mysterious dancing plague of 1518. Welcome to Tavern Tales. It all began on July 14th, 1518, just a week before the holy festival of Mary Magdalene. The summer heat was stifling when Frau Trophia emerged from her half-timbered home and started to dance. But this wasn't a joyous jig typically accompanied by music. Rather, it was a series of erratic, uncontrolled movements as she jumped from one foot to another in a way that looked both awkward and painful. Despite her concerned husband's desperate pleas for her to return home, Frau Trophia continued to dance throughout the day. As dusk settled over Strasbourg, a crowd of confused onlookers began to gather, realizing that she was trapped in this bizarre dance. After several hours of relentless movement, drenched in sweat, and with her body still twitching, she finally collapsed from sheer exhaustion, slipping into a brief and much-needed slumber. Just a few hours later, as dawn broke the following day, Frau Trophia picked up her strange jig once more. After yet another exhausting slumber, she persisted in her dancing into a third day. By now, her feet were bruised and bleeding, and chronic fatigue had transformed her movements into a more erratic and violent display. The crowd of onlookers continued to swell, drawing in spectators from all walks of life, from the poorest of ragged beggars to the wealthiest lords adorned in lavish clothing and sparkling jewels. As the bewildered witnesses observed the spectacle, speculation began to swirl about what could be causing such madness. Initially, some believed that Frau Trophia was merely pretending, a trick to vex her husband, who despised dancing. The Swiss physician and chronicler Paracelsus weighed in with his own theory, suggesting that her disobedience to her husband had triggered this bizarre episode, claiming she had been asked to do something she refused to do just before her peculiar dance began. Perhaps she was possessed, the townsfolk speculated. They wondered if her sins had left her weak, making her vulnerable to the devil's influence. In the 16th century, women were believed to be particularly susceptible to witchcraft, seen as having a more lustful nature that rendered them weaker in both morals and mind. After 4 grueling days with her shoes soaked in blood from the wounds on her feet and her face twisted in agony, it was determined that Frau Trophia was suffering the wrath of an unforgiving saint, whose grotto was located nearby. Thus, she was unceremoniously loaded onto a wagon and transported to the shrine of Saint Vitus in the Vosges Mountains, marking her affliction as Saint Vitus dance. The bizarre nature of her condition was so striking that it was documented by several local officials, preachers, and merchants of the time. In the days that followed, the streets of Strasbourg became alive with the frenzied movements of others, who felt an irresistible urge to dance just like Frau Trophia. It quickly became evident that a wild epidemic was unfolding. Within a month, it was reported that around 400 people from all walks of life, some clad in leather shoes, others in clogs, and many more dancing barefoot, had joined this strange and inexplicable dance party. Dancing with a demented fury, their arms and legs flailing, and their bodies ravaged by fatigue, people began to drop dead. The exact number of casualties remains uncertain, but one report indicates that as many as 15 people were dying each day. Dehydrated and exhausted from the lack of food and water, they were unable to sustain such exertion under the scorching July sun. It wasn't until nearly the end of August that the epidemic finally started to fade, leaving the people of Strasbourg terrified and bewildered, many grieving the loss of their loved ones. This was not the first instance of a dancing plague recorded in history. Back in 1017, in the village of Kolbeek, located in what is now Germany, several villagers reportedly danced uncontrollably in a graveyard. Legend has it that an enraged priest cursed them to dance without stopping for an entire year. Whether this tale is rooted in real events or is merely a cautionary parable against the medieval sin of enjoying oneself is unclear. Another story, just as shrouded in mystery, was recounted by the historian Gerald of Wales in 1188. He described an annual religious ceremony at St. Alderman's Church in South Wales, where many would gather in the churchyard to sing and dance until they collapsed onto the ground. Soon after, they began to mimic whatever work they had unlawfully performed on weekdays. Some pretended to sew, while others worked at looms or mended shoes, appearing as though they were caught in a trance as they sang tunelessly. Coincidentally, the same wording used in a review of my one-man cabaret show. Their bizarre actions seemed ritualistic, and they've been attributed to the same phenomenon that sparked the dancing hysteria of 1518. Another notable case of spontaneous dancing occurred in 1247 in the German town of Erfurt. About 100 children danced and skipped their way out of town, only to collapse in a nearby village and fall into a deep sleep. Distressed parents later found their children, but tragically, some had already succumbed to exhaustion. Many of the survivors suffered from fatigue and convulsions for the rest of their lives. Historians believe this incident may represent another example of a dancing plague, given the description of ongoing symptoms. This event likely contributed to the eerie legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, a town located over 150 miles from Erfurt. In the tale, the citizens of Hamelin hired a piper to rid them of a rat infestation. He played his enchanting music, and the rats followed him away from the town. However, when the townsfolk refused to pay him for his services, the piper sought revenge. He played his magical tunes once more, this time luring the children of the town into a trance before leading them away into a cave, never to be seen again. One of many reasons to never leave your children alone near a flutist. Shortly after the strange occurrence in Erfurt in 1278, the city of Maastricht, now in modern-day Holland, experienced its own dancing tragedy when revelers crowded onto a bridge over the river Moselle. Unsurprisingly, the medieval bridge collapsed, killing everyone on it. The church viewed this disaster as divine punishment for the dancers' irreverence. A much larger outbreak struck in the late 14th century, spreading across the Rhineland from Ghent in the north to Mars and Strasbourg in the south. In the summer of 1374, groups of frenzied dancers roamed from town to town, spreading their dancing mania like a contagious disease. Witnesses reported that thousands were affected, dancing and screaming in agony while calling to God and his saints for mercy. Disturbingly, those caught in this bizarre frenzy cried out like lunatics that they were dying if they did not have sheets tied tightly around their waists. Many believed they were possessed by demons, leading them to a derelict chapel near Trier, where they set up camp and continued their frantic dancing. So how did the uncontrolled dancing of one woman spiral into a full-blown epidemic? Could it be that these dancers were deliberately inflicting pain upon themselves? Was dancing until their feet bled and collapsing from exhaustion a form of self-punishment, reminiscent of the flagellants who whipped themselves during the Black Death? After all, true penance often involved pain and humiliating oneself before God. Physicians of the time theorized that the phenomenon was a physical illness, attributing it to an overheating of the blood caused by an imbalance of the humors. They dismissed any supernatural or astrological explanations, concluding that the best remedy for the dancing plague was, drumroll please, even more dancing. It was believed that the heavy sweating from all that dancing would help to expel the hot blood, despite the alarming fact that many were suffering heart attacks and strokes due to sheer exhaustion and the blazing sun. The region had been ravaged by famine, and in the months leading up to the outbreak of dancing, anxiety soared as residents perceived ominous signs everywhere. The price of grain skyrocketed, leading to the deaths of countless impoverished families from starvation. Then, in the spring, smallpox swept through Strasbourg, followed by the plague in early summer and a mysterious sweating sickness later on. By early 1518, bodies lay dead, frozen and starved in the streets and within their homes. Those who were still alive turned to the clergy, begging for more prayers and special masses to appease their clearly angry god. What other form of punishment might he unleash next? With stress levels peaking, could the dancers have been victims of mass hysteria? Mass psychogenic illness, or mass hysteria, refers to the spread of physical symptoms of an illness without any actual contagion. It can manifest as fits, fainting, or other bizarre behaviors, often occurring in groups of people experiencing extreme stress or anxiety. In the case of the Strasbourg dancers, the severe hardships endured by the townsfolk, famine, disease, and an overwhelming sense of doom, could have driven them to a psychological breaking point. This distress might have found expression in uncontrollable trance-like movements. Given the era's intense spiritual beliefs, such behavior could easily have been interpreted as divine punishment or demonic possession, leading to an even more intense communal response. Another theory suggests that the afflicted may have consumed ergot, a toxic mold that grows on damp rye and wheat, staples in the diets of medieval Europeans. Ergot contains a chemical closely related to LSD, a powerful hallucinogenic drug. If the people of Strasbourg had inadvertently ingested contaminated bread, they might have experienced convulsions, hallucinations, and other symptoms that closely mirrored those seen in the dancing plague. This idea is plausible, as ergotism, also known as St. Anthony's fire, was a recognized affliction at the time and could lead to outbreaks of mass hysteria. However, while the ergot theory accounts for some of the physical symptoms, it fails to explain the prolonged nature of the dancing mania, which persisted for weeks and exhibited a peculiar contagion. This brings us to another potential explanation: the power of belief. In a society deeply influenced by religion and superstition, the residents of Strasbourg may have been primed to perceive the dancing as a supernatural occurrence, possibly linked to the wrath of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics. The fear of divine punishment could have rapidly spread among the populace, leading individuals to become convinced that they too were cursed, thus joining the dance as a means to appease the saint and avoid his anger. Authorities at the time, both religious and secular, were baffled by the bizarre event and tried a variety of solutions. Initially, they encouraged the dancers to continue in the hopes that they would dance it out. However, it soon became clear that the situation was spiraling out of control. In a desperate attempt to contain the chaos, local authorities erected stages and hired musicians to accompany the dancers, believing that organized dancing would provide some relief. Ironically, this plan only seemed to fuel the mania as more and more people began to join in the frenzied dance. Eventually, the authorities, recognizing that their previous approach was exacerbating the epidemic, decided to pursue a different course of action. The dancers were forcibly taken to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus in the nearby mountains, where they were blessed and prayed over in hopes of alleviating their compulsions. Gradually, the fervor of the dancing began to subside, and by September, the plague had finally come to an end. Despite these desperate attempts to cure the afflicted, the dancing plague of 1518 left an indelible mark on the city of Strasbourg. It became a subject of fascination for centuries, standing out as one of the most bizarre and unsettling events in medieval history. Whether driven by psychological stress, ergot poisoning, or mass hysteria fueled by spiritual beliefs, The Dancing Plague serves as a testament to the powerful interplay between mind, body, and culture, highlighting how extreme circumstances can push communities to their breaking point. To this day, historians and scientists continue to debate the true cause of the dancing mania. While we may never fully understand the mysterious events of that fateful summer, one thing is certain. The Dancing Plague of 1518 serves as a stark reminder of how fragile the human psyche can be when confronted with overwhelming adversity. Thank you for watching this episode of Tavern Tales. If you enjoyed this journey into history, please make sure to subscribe, like, and leave your comments below. Do you believe in the mysterious power of the Dancing Plague? Let us know your thoughts.